Hello, everyone. There's still people joining this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar today, but I think we'll get started now. So thank you, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have everyone here for this fourth Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar on COVID-19. And this one today is on strategies for financial survival for media organizations, of course. The virus, the pandemic, is causing major financial strain on media organizations all over the world. However, there are some practical measures that can be taken to stem the loss of revenue and survive, or hopefully survive, this economic upheaval that we're in the middle of. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. My name is Anne Koch, and I'm the Program Director at the Global Investigative Journalism Network. And today I'm going to be your moderator. So I just wanted to tell those who are not familiar with GIJN a little bit about the organization. We are the largest global network of nonprofit investigative journalism organizations in the world. We have 187 members in 78 countries. But we work with investigative journalists and journalists everywhere in the commercial sector, in nonprofits, freelance journalists. We work with you all, and we were established to connect and support journalists. So check out our website, GIJN.org, and we have a newsletter you can subscribe to, a resource center, and other things. I'm delighted today that we have three very experienced experts who are going to share their tips and their analysis on how to survive this economic upheaval, which has put so much pressure on so many media organizations. And all three speakers that we have today bring extensive experience of working on the issue of sustainability for media organizations. And let me introduce them now in the order that they're going to speak. First, Alan Soon is the co-founder and the CEO of Splice, which supports media startups in Asia and advises both commercial and nonprofit media on sustainability and revenue. Today, Alan will focus on the importance of mission and strategy, and also on audiences during this crisis in particular. Bridget Gallagher, our second speaker, is a veteran fundraising consultant, providing advice and support to American and also international media clients. And she will focus on fundraising, which is often particularly critical to investigative journalism outlets. And Ross Settles, Adjunct Professor focused on digital media and entrepreneurship in journalism at the Journalism and Media Center at Hong Kong University, has worked with all sizes of media companies to create the best mix of revenue sources. And he will focus on commercial revenue and on tips to manage financial resources. So that's our panel for today. And we also want to hear from all of you in the audience. Before we start, I just wanted to run through a few logistics. We will be asking one question of you, the audience, during this webinar, and you will be able to see it soon in the poll at the bottom of your screen where it says poll. It's basically, we want to find out a little bit more about how we can help you. And in order to do that, you see it come up now, in order to do that, a bit more detailed information about your needs would be really helpful. Your answers will be anonymous, and we'd be grateful to all of those participating to do that quickly and fill it in, and then we'll take it away for now. We might bring it back up later. So that's the first thing. I think you know the webinar is going to be 75 minutes long, and we'll start with each speaker talking for about 10 minutes or so before we take questions and comments. We will make their presentations available, and other material as well, by the way, on the same topics, available after the webinar. So you don't need to take rapid notes, because we will be able to you'll be able to see them later. Your questions and your messages, you can enter in the chat box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many as we can, and my colleague Eunice Au will be moderating the questions, and she'll come up on screen to do that afterwards. And finally, we will be, just to let you all know, we'll be recording this webinar. So we're recording it. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alan soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. It's Alan here in Singapore, 9 p.m. on this side of the world. That's why I've got the blue KTV lights on, just so that we create that mood and ambiance. I also have my glass of white wine here. So I just wanted to quickly take you through some of the ideas that we've had over the last few months. My co-founder Richard and I have spent a lot of time thinking about where media is going in in a space like this. And in many ways, we look at this as an opportunity that's out there because we believe that this situation that we have now is very much a black swan moment that all of us, I think, will remember, especially in the industry, as as a pivoting point for the way that we work, but also the way we think about our audiences and our users. So let me just quickly start sharing my screen here, and let's have a conversation if we can. Can you all see this? Yeah, I guess that's good, right? Great. So if you want to get a hold of me, tweet me at Ellen Soon. You can also drop me an email if you have any questions. We'd be quite happy to to hear from you. So as I was saying earlier, I think this is really a time to reflect on what's going on in the industry. It's easy for us to in the interest of surviving, just merely react to what's going on in this space. And I think what we're missing here is a chance for us to really think about how media matters, why it matters, how is this going to change 2 years from now, or even a year from now when we're out of this. So in the next few months, every single story that you read out there in the press, in the media, it's going to be a COVID story, which is in some ways already frustrating for me as a news consumer. I find this to be a challenge. Every single story is a COVID story, which is frustrating. Every single journalist that's working out there is also a COVID journalist right now. And so I think the question that you need to all ask is, how are you different from everything else that's being broadcast or printed or posted? This is also a time of financial stress and transition, which means more than ever, what you do needs to matter. What does your user want from you right now? What's relevant? What's irrelevant? What can you do without as a media company? But the most important question here is, what can your user do without as he or she leaves this space that we've created for decades now, and in a way we've defined media to be. Over the next few months, people are going to realize that they can live with certain habits and they can't live with certain habits, and they're going to find new ways to live their lives. And the question is whether you, as a media organization, is ready for that. So are you taking the time to listen, to test, and to ask for feedback? This is not the year to be running products and services that don't matter to your audiences. This is the year where you stop and you ask and you reflect. And you ask, is this what our users want from us? Is this the right way to spend our money, given how tight financials are these days? There was a really good memo that Sequoia, the VC, put out to its founders and CEOs just a month ago. And they said, having weathered every business downturn for nearly 50 years, the most important lesson that one important lesson that they learned is that no one ever regrets making fast and decisive adjustments to changing circumstances. I think this is very important to keep in mind. In downturns, revenue and cash levels always fall faster than expenses. So then the question is, what's really going on in this space and how bad is it? So over the past 2 weeks, we've been running a survey we call Splice Lights On Survey. We wanted to reach out to media orgs to get a better understanding of where they stood. We have 59 responses so far from about 30 countries, and we're just about to close or actually, you know what? I think as of today, we'll just close the survey. But this is what we've learned as part of this process, and this is actually the first time we're putting this out there. So if you have any feedback on our methodology, good or bad, please let us know. Number of people who say that my business is negatively affected by the impact of COVID. The majority of our respondents strongly agree with that statement. Second largest category here is agree. We asked them also, what is your average monthly operating cost? And we did this because we wanted to get a feel for these newsrooms that we were reaching out to and hearing from. Most of them are between the K and 30K types of operating costs. So you can imagine they're quite small. Revenue sources, and this probably isn't much of a surprise, a large majority of them are still on the advertising side of things. There's memberships and subscriptions represented here as well. A number of them also do a lot of sponsored content, and and also events and grants. So you see a nice split of this pie over here, but advertising is the biggest component. So with that, it's probably not much of a surprise, with this question that we asked. In Q1 of 2020, which of your revenue sources were most affected by COVID? Those that were heavily dependent on advertising saw about a 30% decline, or rather 30% impact as far as advertising went. You also see similar types of knock-on effects with sponsored content as well as events. So in percentage terms, what was the estimated drop in your Q1 revenue compared with the same period last year? The majority said about 50%. So you can imagine how tight the situation is right now for a lot of them. We asked them about their top monthly costs to get a better idea of what the cost structure was like. Number one top cost was full-time staff. Second largest monthly cost was part-time staff. And third was office space, which, as you can imagine now, is something, that it's very hard for them to walk away from as well and to unwind. So based on your current financial situation, we asked, how long do you expect to keep the business running at its current costs? The answer, the biggest component here was 1 to 3 months, which 30% selected. Also, based on your projections, do you expect to cut jobs in the next 6 months? 40% said yes. 37% said maybe. So these are pretty staggering numbers. And where do you need help most in the next 3 months? Most of them said operational cash flow. Others said payroll and help, restructuring finances and, product development as well. I was happy to see was a strong component here. So Rasmus Nielsen from Reuters Institute has a really, he had a fantastic tweet just the other day. Business as usual is suicidal for the news industry. So the challenge here is for us to think about what this new world needs to look like so that we can get out of this phase with our heads on, with our newsrooms operating, and, and us still, having a viable business model of sorts. So common sense rules of digital: anything analog will be digitized, anything digital will be commoditized, anything digital can be decentralized and distributed, and everything digital must be specific, relevant, and intent-driven. These are our basic concepts that we've come up with at Splice in the way we're looking at where the future is going. The first two are pretty obvious. We've seen this happen in the last 15 years. The third point is actually something that I think it's only hit home in the last couple of months, as we're all spending more time increasingly online and also on conference calls and events like these. It's really shown us that digital is now a decentralizing force in the way we work and the way we think and the way we live our lives. But also because it's digital, it fights for relevance with everything else that's digital out there. If you were to unlock your phone right now, I would guarantee you have at least 10 different notifications from, a multitude of apps, all vying for your attention as well. So increasingly, this is the direction that we're headed as a society, and I think it's really important for media companies to think about. So let's fast forward to, across the next 2 years, 2021, 2022, and 2022, and how different does the world look from this standpoint? Based on what we think is happening, our expectation is that we're going to see further attrition of the mass media models out there, which means that more jobs will be lost from companies that have built, strong business over the last decades around mass media in terms of broadcast, in terms of prints, in terms of, TV studios, for example. We're seeing an accelerated end to printed newspapers. Over the past month or so, we've seen a number of media companies starting to turn off their printing presses and suspending them. And soon enough, you're going to see an emergence of a new mindset after a few months that printed newspapers and printed magazines may not be as necessary as we once thought they were. We're going to see an emergence of more B2B media companies, I believe, providing intel on very specific areas that we currently find lacking. So, for example, healthcare, fintech, supply chain management, and streaming services. There is a huge opportunity for deep reporting in all of these areas. And I think when it comes to something as vital as how companies work and how the economies work, there's going to be a lot more reporting that we'll see in this space. Healthcare reporting, for example, is severely lacking. It's a bit of a shame that the only one that I can think of is STAT that's out there. And I think that a crisis like this tells us that we need to be better informed when it comes to B2B types of reporting. So decentralized and distributed workflows, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing people getting more comfortable being online, being on cameras, going to an online conference. And because of that, we're going to see lower operational costs. We're going to see an accelerated embrace of live video and going live. But I think one of the most interesting things is that as people become comfortable working from home, as journalists become comfortable working from home, we'll see a greater diversity in journalism. We're going to see talent emerging from second-tier cities, third-tier cities. We're going to see disabled journalists, working in the profession, even though they can't make it out to big cities or into a physical newsroom. And the final point here is something that kind of summarizes our overall view of this space. We're going to see more media startups anyway in the next few years, just because now increasingly these are cheaper to run. And this year being this COVID year, the proof of concept that we put out there is a proof that we can build operations online and we can serve audiences online like we've never seen before. So I think this is the important thought that I wanted to leave you with. It's an important year. It's a black swan year. And I think in many ways, it is an opportunity that's too good to miss out. If you're looking to pivot your business, this is the best year to do that. If you wanted to try a crazy idea and learn new skills and introduce new workflows into what you're trying to do, I think this is the year for it. If you look at an online event like this, the level of patience that we all have for technical issues that come with these things, with the problems, the workflow issues that come with trying to gather, everyone around the world over a screen. This is an interesting year because people are patient. They want to find new solutions and they accept that this is going to be the year where things work and things don't work, and that's okay. So, this being a global event, this being an experience that all of us are sharing all around the world, gives us a huge opportunity to introduce new ideas, to try out new ideas in terms of prototyping, in terms of products, in terms of reaching new audiences. So make it a year in which you find ways to adapt. So with that, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. That is so interesting. And thank you also for giving us the first information that you've got out of your own survey, which is, I have to say, very sobering in terms of what's coming, but also your ideas about how we might be able to adjust to this period are really inspiring. So thanks very much for that. Bridget, let's turn to you now to hear about fundraising in this context. Bridget, you're going to have to turn your speaker on. Sorry, you're muted. Sorry, we didn't hear you. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for taking some time out of your day to join us for this. And thanks to the whole GIJN team for joining us for this. My name is Bridget Gallagher. I'm a major gifts fundraising consultant, as Anne said, primarily to media and journalism organizations in the US and all around the world, coming to you this morning from New York City. So where I want to start with this is, what makes people anxious, particularly the journalists and journalism organizations that I work with, what makes them anxious about major gifts fundraising is this sense that it's kind of mysterious, that it's governed by these unwritten rules that you don't know and are going to be penalized for not following. So I think a helpful place to start in any scenario is to just demystify this a little bit. And fundamentally, the best way to think about major gift relationships are as relationships, as personal relationships that are born out of trust and empathy, and taking the time to get to know one another. You know, the most fruitful fundraising relationships you're going to have are going to come from really taking the time to identify the donors that are likely to share your values and an interest in your work, taking the time to educate them, to help them understand your value proposition, and persisting and kind of nudging those relationships along, nurturing them through people's busy lives. That's why I tend to think of them as habits. You know, this is work that has to be done every single day. Fundraising is not your least favorite activity that you relegate to, 6 o'clock before you kind of knock off for the day once a week. This is something that you kind of, the best fundraisers that I know, the best fundraisers that I work with are the people and the organizations that really embed these kinds of behaviors in their sort of organizational DNA, and that think about this, every morning when they wake up and before they go to bed at night, and a dozen times in between. So if you've tuned into a GIJN training or you've shown up at a conference, you've probably heard me talk about these habits as sort of the 3 Ps, right? Prepare, get to know your donor and know your own kind of readiness for approaching donors. Present, be able to articulate your value proposition in a really succinct and compelling way. And then persist, nurture those relationships, give them time to develop, give a prospective donor time to get to know you. And those are more important than ever in this particular environment. I'm not going to go into them in too much more detail on that because there are plenty of, I've done this in other contexts that you can find on the GIJN website. But at the end of the day, all of these habits are in the interest of forming a personal relationship, getting to know them and what's important to a donor, helping them understand how their work advances like that. And we need these kinds of relationships to get us through this crisis. It's really not so different than what Alan was just talking about in terms of really being sincere about kind of listening and understanding. There's a lot of uncertainty in this environment, and personal relationships will help you navigate that because it creates the space and the capacity for candor, for honesty, for vulnerability, for the chance to listen and learn and understand. So in terms of the COVID situation, specifically in philanthropy, there's a lot that we don't know in that space, right? There's the kind of uncertainty of the journalism proposition, which Alan has just alluded to. In the philanthropic landscape, there's a lot we don't know yet, right? This is, the combination of a public health crisis, a humanitarian crisis, and a financial crisis on a global scale, the likes of which we've never seen. And it's really hard to understand at this moment, kind of from where we're all sitting, what that's going to look like over the longer term. In the near term, the response from the kind of philanthropic community has been quite encouraging. You've probably seen a lot of RFPs roll out, a lot of kind of rapid response or relief funds popping up, some of them for journalism specifically. I think Google News Initiative just launched a new one yesterday. You've probably seen announcements from some of the larger foundations and grant makers around the world who are relaxing requirements for reporting or site visits, who are allowing grantees to convert project-specific grants to general support. There's a lot of willingness for kind of dialogue at this moment for you to go to your existing donors and talk about what you need. And typically in situations like this, we do find that philanthropists are more generous, willing to kind of dig deeper and support people in times of great needs. But nonetheless, it's hard to say kind of, where we end up in 2021, 2022 and beyond as the impact of the kind of financial crisis hits foundation endowments over the longer term, hits people's pocketbook. So that sort of implication for individual donor behavior, foundation donor budgets, hard to say at this point. And I know that, that level of uncertainty is layered over the disruption to your workflow, the need to keep yourself and your team safe, navigating the challenges of remote work and quarantine, all the logistical difficulties we're all in. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's also a lot of opportunity. And I think that thinking about learning from your audience and understanding what your audience needs in the same way that you think about understanding what your donors need will help you devise the best strategy for your organizational sustainability moving forward. What you can control in this moment is the way you advance your organization's mission, the way you serve your constituency or your community. You know, the way you demonstrate value, the way you distinguish yourself in an environment like this is, you know, day in, day out, really focus on why you started doing this to begin with. What's the value that you're really adding to your community? I've had a number of clients and other organizations kind of reach out and ask, is it okay to fundraise? Is it appropriate to fundraise in an environment like this? Are my messages even relevant when there is so much immediate, you know, basic human needs that need to be met? What I would say to all of you, regardless of what kind of coverage you're doing, is that journalism is a form of first response. You know, whether you're directly covering COVID or not, as Alan said, and, you know, in some ways, every story is a COVID story, right? There's, you know, the nature of the pandemic is that there's not a community or an issue that isn't impacted by this in some way and won't be moving forward. And at the same time, you know, the COVID coverage sucking up so much oxygen in the media space means that there are really important stories that aren't getting told in the way that they need to. And that's a role that you can play too, to continue to add value to your community. There's the immediate need for trustworthy information and content, and there's the opportunity to, you know, kind of dig deeper into your archives and resurface some of those enterprise or long form or investigative pieces that maybe didn't get as much attention as you wanted the first time around because people are at home and hungry for content. So I think, you know, kind of interrogating your mission, your content, figuring out how you can make the best use of what you have and respond to some of those needs that your community, that your audience, and that your donors have will help you kind of navigate this. And figuring out what that is means relying on those, you know, preparation, presentation, persistence habits. This is about taking the time to get to know your people, whether they're audience members or donors or other stakeholders, and helping to communicate your value to them in a way that helps them understand why they need you, why they appreciate your mission, and why they might want to become a supporter to help you make it through this. So the key takeaways in this moment for me and for the clients that I work with is that the fundamentals haven't changed. I mean, you really have to actually double down on them. They're more important than ever. You have to be really rigorous because I know, you know, so many other things are competing for your attention, but you have to be really rigorous in your commitment to learning about your donors and your audience, you know, being prepared before you sort of go out, reach out to them. And presenting your work to them in ways that are relevant, ways that resonate, ways that help your message get heard above the din of kind of the coronavirus crisis, right? And you have to be patient and, you know, kind of gracefully persistent in cultivating these relationships. And that's, you know, with donors and with audience members alike, to, you know, really put the time into building that trust, building that empathy, building the relationships that will be fruitful, that will sustain your business through this crisis and through future ones. Will make your organization more resilient, right? I think at the most basic level, you know, it helps to think about this work in human terms. And I think that that's kind of one of the most valuable lessons and maybe opportunities of this crisis is, you know, I'm a fundraiser, so I'm kind of classically like silver lining oriented, but I do think that, you know, it's really easy to talk about donors as, you know, as a species, as a group that behaves uniformly and predictably, right? I can, you know, I've been asked a lot for kind of trend analysis. You know, what am I seeing? What am I hearing from the donor community that would give, you know, some guideposts, some navigational guidance to organizations like yours in a moment like this? And, you know, I'm happy to kind of get on webinars like this and speculate about that because there's certainly a lot of literature. There's a, you know, there's a lot of surveys. There's a lot of stuff out there. But the most relevant answer to that question is going to come from you asking that question of your donor and doing it in a really sincere and humble way and being prepared to listen to the answer. You know, I mean, I think if you think about that program officer that you've been putting off contacting or that philanthropist that you've been putting out following up with, you know, she is just as likely to be sitting at her kitchen table, you know, distracted, maybe worried about her job, worried about her family as you are. And I think that that creates a really powerful opportunity when so much of fundraising success is predicated on that ability to build trust and empathy, for you to reach out and ask, how someone is doing is a really powerful way to relate, human to human to somebody. In the process, you can give them an update on what you're doing, how you're responding to this, and what this has meant for your organization. But I think that listening goes a long way in this environment. I think that you have more willingness on the part of other people to share what they need, to share what they're concerned about. And you have the opportunity to then pivot and talk about how your work is responding to that, or how you can help with that, or how, even if you don't have those answers, help share what you're concerned about and what you're working on and what you're challenged by as well. So I think that, the best insights that you'll come up with in this crisis is by reaching out to those stakeholders and asking them what they need, what they're looking at, what they're concerned about. I think that will help you devise the best strategy to move through this, and will, in the process, strengthen the donor relationships you have and allow you to cultivate some new ones in ways that make this make it more sustainable and more resilient moving beyond the crisis. That's where I'll leave it for now.
Great, thank you so much, Bridget. So helpful as always. Really, really good points. And I see lots of questions coming in, and just to remind people who are part of this that you can ask questions, make comments, and so on in the chat box at the bottom. And we're going to come to you after we hear from Ross Settles. So Ross, over to you.
Right. So much positivity. I think that's really encouraging. Yeah. I, on the other hand, have to, I guess, for lack of a better word, bring a little bit of reality, or at least commercial reality. So those of you that are in commercial media that substantially live on advertising or sponsored content or events or even major services like consulting, you guys are probably feeling a lot of pain right now. And Alan's survey was indicative of what certainly I'm hearing from the US and what we see around Asia. Those of you that are in kind of well-established long-term investigative journalism outlets or NGOs, you may have a bit of a cushion. You may not feel this as urgently right now because your grants are in, you've gotten confirmation, and you have a bit of a cushion, a runway, so to speak, to do the work that you need to do, whether it's COVID related or other related. So what I'm going to talk about today is from experience somewhat. This is less teaching, less academic than, this is actually my third crisis. So 9/11 was a crisis where the company I worked at, we went from 300 people to 30 people in about 6 months. And then we had the Great Recession, and now we have COVID. And I have to say, COVID is unique of the three in that it doesn't, there's no clear permanent to it.
Ross, we just lost you a little bit. Ross, sorry, we just lost you there. Could you repeat that last sentence again? There was a bit of interference.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Just talk about how COVID is different. We heard you until that moment. Yeah, thanks.
COVID is different in that the terminus, the end of COVID, it's not completely clear. It's not clear whether there is an end to COVID, whether this is just a kind of a gradually, as Alan somewhat alluded to, gradually evolving new normal. What I can tell you that will happen is in each of these three cycles, each of these three crises, things that were happening accelerated. So the switch from traditional advertising to digital advertising at 9/11 accelerated. In 2008, all of the transitions from print newspapers and traditional media to digital, they all accelerated because people are looking for an more efficient, cash required option. So I'm going to talk a little bit about experience and how you manage in these situations. It won't apply to everybody on the phone, but hopefully there'll be some tricks that you can take away from this. So the first thing is, and if you looked at what Alan was talking about up front, many of you, especially commercial media, will have large amounts of revenue still that are from advertising, sponsored content, which for me is a form of advertising, events, and paid services, whether you're selling consulting or fact-checking. In all of those businesses, you usually write a contract, and then you're paid subsequent to the service being rendered. And there's a lag time in that. What you will have to realize is the people that bought those services are also experiencing financial pressure and trying to prioritize who to pay when. So the very first thing, if you're in these businesses, is get your sales teams to make a list of invoices outstanding, and then get those salespeople to go, we call it chasing the invoice. They need to get the cash in.
Ross, I think you need to share your slides, don't you? I'm not.
Am I not sharing the slides?
No, we aren't seeing your slides yet. So if you can, don't worry if there's a problem, but if you can share them, that would be great.
Can you see them?
Perfect. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I was talking into my slides, but you can see.
Yes.
So for advertising and paid service, for any service that you invoice, you do the work, and then you get paid sometimes 30 days later, sometimes 90 days later. If you have big advertising accounts, many times there'll be 180 days run the ad. You send the ad voice to the ad agency passes it to the advertiser. By the time you see the cash, in a normal world, it can be 3 months. Don't let that happen. Get the sales teams to chase those invoices and get as much cash in as fast as possible. If you have to deal, so if it means giving them a discount to pay today and not wait 3 months, give them a discount. Because 3 months from now, no one knows what their cash situation will look like. So the first thing is on invoiced sold services, whether it's an advertising service, a fact-checking service. This is a pretty small thing, but at the same time, if your income is predominantly advertising, it can make the difference between being able to pay rent 2 months in a row or being pushed out of your offices. If you were working income from nets, whether they be Google AdSense, Facebook Audience Network, YouTube, or Tribal Fusion, or other ad networks out there, depending on your deal, they're also going to pay post the ad run. They often pay to an escrow account. They pay to an account that you then have to transfer to your bank. A lot of, especially small media, will hold that cash with the ad network. It basically avoids having to pay taxes on it. So they hold that cash there until they need it. You need it now. So if you have large cash amounts with Google AdSense, with YouTube, with Facebook Audience Network, move that cash into a bank account that you can access locally. Because cash is, in this environment, it's what's going to pay your staff. It's what's going to cover people that are in health difficulty. So the first advice is at the cash. And a lot of that is tracking down people that owe you money, whether it's advertisers or people that have bought services from you in the past, and making sure that that cash is coming in, at least coming in on time, and ideally coming in a little early. Staff issues, especially if you have a local ad staff, they're tough. I mean, they will be the toughest decision you'll have to make, because you're going to have to bet on how long the COVID crisis is going to last, and what advertising is going to look like at the end of it. Because in the short term, you're going to have a situation where, I can only tell you about markets in East Asia, but the average market in East Asia is seeing the total advertising spending collapse by something like 50, in some markets 75%. So what is going to happen is the accounts that your sales team are calling on nobody to spend, but you have salaries to pay, and you're going to have to make a judgment on how long that mismatch can persist. There are tricks. You can rotate staff. You can redeploy them to other things. Perhaps there are things they can do in the newsroom. Perhaps there are things they can do on services that you're selling separately. Maybe you're doing online events that they can help with, but you may have to retrench. Like I said, my first experience with this is I ended up basically letting 80% of the company go before I let myself go. Compensation, for salespeople that you keep, many of them are being paid commissions. You may want to rebalance. If they're mostly salary and only little commission, you may want to move to more commission. So you pay them when you get paid. It keeps them enabled. It keeps them out there looking for opportunities, but at the same time, it removes a certain amount of burden or instinct. Sorry if this is a bit businessy technical, but those of you that have big advertising teams or big reliance on commercial advertising sales, you'll almost certainly understand what I'm talking about. If you're in the subscription business, and this is just the experience that I have had, other people are seeing different things. Usually what you're going to see is you'll see a short-term surge. Lots of people coming in. You'll get new registrations if you have a membership to subscription or a registration to paid membership funnel. You'll get a lot of new people coming in for registrations. And so the first thing you want to do is make sure that you're capturing these registrations in some way. The second thing is new registrations, get them to convert to pay as fast as you can. If you're doing paywall changes, if you have a paywall in place, you want to do it so that so by paywall change, what I mean is in many cases, people are dropping their paywalls in order to provide access for free to their COVID-19 coverage and perhaps all of their coverage. In most markets, when you drop coverage, you generally extend your subscribers' subscription time, which means the next time they come up for payment gets pushed out. Ideally, what you want to do is beg them to kind of donate the time that you're giving for free so that their renewal date comes on the same date. All that is doing is keeping cash regular in your income statement. The long term, I can only tell you my experience from 9/11. The long term is there are going to be lots of people asking for donations. And so in the short term, you may see a lot of people coming to register, maybe the registration's converting to subscriptions. But there was even an article just this week from the reports at Harvard that news traffic is starting to decline in the US. What's going to happen is people will become fatigued of the story, and a lot of other demands for donations and charity, personal donations and personal charity, will start to crop up, whether it's your local bookstore or a local arts organization or the person at the end of the street. And so what you want to try to do, and this sounds a bit competitive, but you want to try to secure as many of these donations as early as possible. Because the longer this goes, the more demands for charity and the more demands for donations and the more demands for individual contributions there will be. Expenses. Probably the two most important things I can tell you here are, in the short term, if you're not feeling any cash pressure, don't worry about it, but start planning. You're going to need to manage expenses, and that's going to be kind of things. One, you're going to need to prioritize. So you're going to need to go through your prioritize and decide which things must be paid, which things do I pay because that's who I am. So I have a client here in East Asia who is a very strong advocate of small and local arts businesses. And so they're paying small vendors first, where many people would pay their rent first, they're paying small vendors first. Because since they're not working in their apartment, they're not working in their office anymore, if they're evicted from their office, they don't really care. But the small vendors is really how they have built their reputation in this market. So one is prioritize, and prioritize it based on what is it critical to operate, and then who you are as an institution. Secondly, is make sure you have control. A lot of people, especially in markets that have very sophisticated financial infrastructure like Hong Kong or Singapore or places in Europe or North America, that you'll put a large expense, the payment will go on to some sort of automatic payment. You should go in and remove those, because you don't want to be in a situation where the bank makes a deduction from your account when you need the cash for something else. So anything that you have automated for payment, especially anything major, step it back to manual. Make sure that you remind yourself and you create as many reminders as you need to, but it gives you the flexibility to say, I'm going to pay this today and I'm going to pay it in full. I'm not going to pay it in all. I'm going to call the landlord and I'm going to tell him I can only pay him half and see what he says. But some of us will get to that situation. And so the two things are prioritize what those expenses are, which ones must be paid, and make sure that you have full control over when to pay it, who to pay it to, and how much of the total to pay. So contracts can be rent, it can be, many of us are involved in large events. Alan just had a huge event, or just had a big event that was planned for Thailand. They have big contracts involved. Know what the exit date from the contract is, know if there's a penalty, and have a plan for when and how to make the decision. It's not easy, and it can be painful, especially things like rent. But the best thing to do is get a list of contracts from whoever your financial manager is. There should be a column, who is it, what's it for, when does it expire, and what's the penalty to get out, and be prepared. The last is staff and freelancers. There's no easy way to say this. And I wish I could say in this environment, no one's going to face that. But you saw in Alan's numbers, people are already recognizing, what was it, something like between will and probably will 70% or something. It's kind of my experience. There's no science to this. You're going to have to manage and prioritize staff. That's full-time staff, freelance staff. The first thing, and again, you can probably tell from the accent, I'm an American. I come from a market that has no institutionalized healthcare. So my first advice is know the healthcare situation for the staff that are important, for all of your staff, and then especially for staff that are important. Have a sense with your board, with your management team, how you plan on saving. Is it a reduction? Does everybody take a reduction? Does only the executive team take a reduction? Do you go into some sort of rotation? Do people get furloughed? Furlough has different definitions in different places. So in the US, it means you don't get paid, but they may cover your insurance. In Hong Kong, it means they pay for basically your security, but you don't get paid. And retrenchment is just that. You're going to cut people. My experience is get as much early visibility to this. If you're going to need to do this, know as far in advance as possible, and try to keep the decisions clear, try to keep them simple, and try to keep them few. You don't want to be in a situation where if you're 300 people and you're going to end up at 30, you don't want to fire 30 every 2 weeks. It's demoralizing, and you might as well just close the business at the outset. The only other thing I can say about freelancers, and this is experience from clients in South Asia, is there's a lot of lag time in Asian payment networks, especially across borders. And what happens is freelancers often don't get paid. Sometimes they don't get paid for 3 months, and they'll often get paid with a huge bank charge on the back end. So maybe let's say Alan done a freelance work for me, I pay him $300. 3 months later, Alan gets $250. So you want to find whatever method you can, you want to pay as quickly as possible, and ideally eliminate any fees. Just because the freelancers, they're going to struggle. It's going to be a tough road to hoe for a couple of months here, or maybe even a couple of years. A couple of caveats. Many of your financial managers, many of you probably familiar with this, many of your financial managers will have a thing called a cash flow statement. Get it and start looking at it. How many months, Alan, it was the very first question, maybe the second question Alan showed. How many months of runway, how many months of operations do you have with your current cash, assuming no new cash gets in? If you've got what we call accounts payable, if you've got invoices outstanding, go get the cash. Make it a first priority for the people that are responsible for those accounts. For expenses, some priorities, know what's critical, know what's cultural to your organization, and get as much control over those expenses as you can. And staff, the only thing I can say is morale will be hard, and it's really easy as leaders of your organization to get sucked into the details and forget that people are struggling. And so whatever you do, whether it's laying off people at one time, or making sure that everybody is clearly communicated to, or communicating to people on a regular basis, Or before this, we had a little happy hour here at Hong Kong University, just because I haven't seen the rest of my teaching team in 6 weeks. The last thing is save early, whatever you can do, save cash early, spend late, just because until we know what the COVID-19 universe looks like, you want to liquid resources that you can use to, but if you're doing product development, that you can hire a designer. If you're doing a special COVID series, you can hire somebody. If you need to bail out a team that's gotten stuck someplace, you can do that. So that's kind of the downside of this conversation. I wish I could be a little bit more perky, but it's a lot of tough and very scarring decisions that I'm afraid many of us will end up having to make. So I'm going to close there and turn it back to Anne.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks very much. I think that big dose of reality is important as well, obviously, and really important. We had a bit of dropout in your Zoom connection. So if people miss something that they are desperate to find out about now, please put your question into the chat box. We're going to go to those questions in a moment. Also, Ross GIJN will be publishing some of Ross's thinking on the COVID crisis and how to respond quite shortly. So watch our website for that piece. And one last thing before we go to the questions, which is if you haven't already filled in the questions and you don't mind doing so in that poll box on your greatest need, please go ahead and do that. And before the end, we'll show you what people are saying. We'll share it with everyone. So Eunice, over to you. Some questions, please.
Yes, the first group of questions that I have are related more to donors and financial assistance. So Anushka Delik asks, what are Bridget's key points for approaching new donors during this time? And how to build a virtual relationship through email? Murali Krishnan from India is asking, how can we find donors, especially when we are a regional-based digital news organization? Gidado Schweib is asking, he runs a youth-led media organization in Nigeria. What are the COVID-related stories that donor agencies would like to fund, and what are the steps to take to reach out to these donors to ask what are their concerns during this pandemic? Will this pandemic shape the media industry forever? And if I may squeeze in one last question for Bridget, what do we expect from governmental media assistance, especially international governmental assistance? Will it be slightly cut, remain the same, or slashed within the next year?
I wish I knew the answer to the last one. Bridget, yes, please. There's some really, really good questions there. And you're on mute, so
Yes.
there you go. Thanks.
So, I'll take the kind of broad group of questions about kind of finding donors and cultivating new donors at a moment like this. Again, the fundamentals of those things don't change. Your best donors are going to come from, people who are in your audience, people who are peer-to-peer connections of current donors that you have, asking them who else that they can introduce you to, asking, board members or other stakeholders, or other friends, strategists, consultants, other professionals you work with, who would be interested in the work we're doing. We have tremendous need right now. We're providing really important services to the community. We need help. Who else can we be talking to about this work? I think kind of working from your sort of circle of connections outward yields more fruitful prospect kind of leads, and more quickly than, kind of doing a lot of desk research and looking at, some of the big national or international funders in the media landscape writ large are likely to. So interrogate your own network first in terms of thinking about how to surface those new donor prospects. And in terms of, introducing yourself to those donors, and sort of cultivating that relationship when we're not able to to go to personal meetings. You're not able to ask somebody out for coffee. You're not able to go to that conference that's maybe been really useful for kind of schmoozing those new prospects. I tend to think that the sort of fundamentals of initiating those communications are kind of the same as they've always been. Come up with a really tight, concise organizational overview and case for support that answers those urgent questions about, why this, why the work that you're doing, why are you the best organization to do it, and why now? Why does this matter at this particular moment? In some ways, I think these introductory conversations are almost made easier by the moment like this, only because that sense of urgency is pretty clear all around and kind of shared by everybody. Sometimes you might have to work harder to find that sort of inflection point, or change in the landscape or the environment that makes your work matter more now than it did before. So use this opportunity for that sense of urgency that it adds. Make sure that you're not tone deaf in your outreach, that you are reflecting the moment that you're in and sensitive to all of the other things that you're competing with. But don't be shy about making it clear that this is an important moment for your work as a journalism organization as well, and highlight that. In terms of the government stuff, I don't have a good handle on that, honestly. I think that for the most part, the kind of larger, multilateral grant-making bodies, kind of set their budgets fairly far in advance. So I would imagine they'll be okay for the next year. But I think anything beyond, the immediate future is awfully hard to predict at this point. So I don't know that I can responsibly speculate too much about that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Really interesting. Eunice, can we come back to you now? I guess the next lot of questions are more about the overall economic prospects for media.
Yes, you're right. Kriti Buju is asking, in a developing country like Nepal, where the number of media is mushrooming and the market has already been slowing down before COVID-19, many organizations have not been paying their journalists for months. So now with the industry collapsing and very little advertising, how can the media bounce back? And then Nadine Jurat asks, does Alan's prediction on printed newspaper also relate to analog radio? In the survey that Alan was showing, is there a correlation between the size of the media and how long they believe they can continue with their current business model? That is, are smaller media more vulnerable? And the third question would be from Jean Brooks. If printed newspapers are going to end, how will we serve areas with limited access to internet or broadband? Because where she comes from in rural New York, there's a resistance to broadband, as well as diverse populations such as Hispanic and Indigenous that aren't served by local radio or TV stations. And they have a majority aging population that is slow to change to new formats.
Good. Okay, Alan, do you want to kick off? And then Ross, maybe you can come in, particularly on I'm interested in the question about Nepal, but it's bigger than Nepal as well. It's, yeah. Alan.
Yeah, so I'm trying to recall what that first question was about with regard to radio. So if I'm reading this question right, I think the question is whether radio would suffer the same fate as newspapers would, along the lines of my prediction there. I think radio is very different just because its distribution costs are very different. It involves basically a couple of things. You set up a radio station, you set up a radio tower, and on the consumer side, the consumer buys a radio device, whatever they're called these days. And for that to work, there is basically no distribution costs or relatively low distribution costs, right? If you were to look at newspapers, for example, you would have a printing press, you would have delivery trucks, you would have to get the newspapers out to 7-Eleven every day, or whatever the mom and pop shop is, in the neighborhood. So for newspapers, there is a cost every day that is involved in getting the newspaper out to the end user. With radio, you don't actually have that, right? So if the end user already has a radio device, they're able to pick up programs for free, and it's just a matter of turning it on. So I think of all of these, and the interesting thing also is that radio is the oldest mass media that's out there, and it survived as long as it has because the friction in terms of costs and the friction in terms of usage is just so low. This is really something you turn on and it's there. You can leave it at the back of the room and it just works. You don't have to connect it to the Wi-Fi. You don't have to to charge it, although you got to buy batteries sometimes. But it's really quite amazing that radio has lasted as long as it has in the face of all these different types of mass media that's cropped up decades after its arrival. But yeah, I think the short answer is that will linger.
Okay. There was another one for you as well there. Maybe, Eunice, do you want to recap? Because the questions were quite varied. Just that second one that was addressed to Alan, to remind everybody. Can you?
The one on printed newspaper also
Yeah,
related.
indeed.
Well,
Yeah, and also, yes, indeed.
Okay, in the survey, is there a correlation between the size of the media and how long they believe they can continue with their current business model, i.e., are smaller media more vulnerable?
Yeah, no, we didn't do that. And in hindsight, after we put out the survey, we thought, we should have found a way to target this better in terms of, reaching the newsrooms that we wanted to hear from, and to be able to then segment between large newsrooms and smaller ones, for example. But no, the short answer is no, and I wish we did that.
Okay, thank you for that. And Ross, the question asked from someone from Nepal, I think, is a very interesting question.
Eunice, could you read the question from a colleague in Nepal again?
If I recall correctly, it's about basically cuts already happening, people are already being laid off, and what implications that this will have. But Eunice, pick up from that.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, the market was already slowing down before COVID-19. So with less advertising, how can the media bounce back? That's the question.
Nepal is a very particular media market. Again, it's all markets are very particular. Nepal is a market I've spent a lot of time in. The bounce back is going to require some exits. I think the question pointed out, there are lots and lots of people starting media in Nepal because the costs are quite low. There is a lot of, how should we say, politically directed advertising in Nepal. So advertising to a friend's from a political party or part of government to a friend's media that may actually have no distribution or no audience, but yet still they're getting advertising. So I'm not sure that there is a short-term answer to the media market solution in Nepal is a measurement solution in my mind. A very sexy solution, but some sort of, you'll see this in other places, regulation of government advertising spending. A large portion of advertising spending in Nepal is from government or there are a series of new provincial governments and VDCs. And so not to get too technical, but I think there's going to need to be some regulation around how government spends its advertising money. And there's going to need to be some measurement of media effectiveness so that spending is useful. And then we'll see. But for now, it's not a very efficient market because there's not a lot of measurement and there's a lot of unmarket-based buying. And until that's cleaned up, I don't think there's a lot of upside. And journalists not being paid has been going on there for quite a long time. So I wish I could say it was otherwise, but yeah.
Yes, you bring a very good point up, which is that there was massive commercial pressures already before this COVID crisis, which are being exacerbated, but it wasn't for many people easy before this started. So it's actually making things considerably worse, with some notable exceptions.
I mean, one of the things, can I add to what you—
Yes, please.
Back to what we were talking about earlier, any trend that was happening before this crisis is going to make more acute. So what the gentleman from Nepal is describing is actually a trend that had been going on for quite a long time in Nepal. And now it's just going to make it that much more critical. It's going to create a lot of tension and a lot of pain. And it's going to happen quite quickly. So.
Okay, thank you. Eunice, we've got two more questions, I believe, related to commercial revenue and marketing and so on. Yeah, could you tell us what people are asking?
Jumana Al-Tamimi is asking whether there are any specific tips for individuals who are looking into the option of starting up their own media business, and what is the viability of such startups in a market where there are already many well-established media brands. And the second question is from Vaishali Dixit. With so much of cash crunch and budgeting issues, how many companies and corporates would corporations would actually be interested in spending for any kind of marketing? And what should be the approach for business to business media platform where the market is already small and niche?
Okay, so Alan, do you want to start there, and then or the other way around, Ross, you can start if you like. What? Why don't you start? And then Alan, would you pick up as well? The startups was a point Alan made, one of the points he made in his presentation. So maybe Alan, you can focus on that, and Ross, you could focus a bit more on the corporates and their advertising budgets.
You know, corporates and advertising budgets, it's a little bit borrowing from Bridget's playbook. I mean, Bridget's approach is this classic, not to use this S word, but Bridget's approach is a classic sales approach. So if you have good relationships with corporates, especially then you stay in touch, understand how they're managing what's happening to their business. In some cases, there are businesses that are, I won't say thriving, but they're not hurting. There are some businesses, online conference software, online banking. There are lots of businesses that are actually experiencing, I wouldn't say a thriving market, but not a bad market. And they may have messages they want to put out there that aren't subscribed to my product, but to talk about the services they're providing in this difficult time. So a little bit of it is taking a page from Bridget's, I guess it's the page one. It's you're building a relationship. You need to understand how their business is. And then from that back into how can you be helpful in that way. The business, how should we approach B2B media platform where the market is already small and niche? It's a harder thing. I need to know more about the vertical because that's a very, like you said, it's a small B2B niche market. So each niche market is going to have a certain amount of niche economics. So hard to answer that without knowing more about it. But the first one is I'll borrow 2 pages from Bridget's presentation. Alan.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand where this question is coming from. I think we're talking about the question by Vaishali Dixit,
Yes.
who wrote, "What should be the approach for B2B media platforms where the market's already small and niche?" You see,
But we also had a question about new startups at in the current moment, and whether there's any feasibility with if the market's already crowded. Those two.
Yeah, right. So if the question is whether the market's crowded as far as media startups go, the short answer is no, it's not. The thing about digital media that we all need to keep in mind is that this is a format that favors niche, vertically focused, long tail types of content and types of audiences that come with them as well. To ask that question, for example, if you were to flip it around and ask, are there too many channels on YouTube for all the interest groups that are out there and all the communities and all the, the hobbies that are out there and all the knowledge that's out there? The answer is also no, because, the beauty of digital is that it allows you to chase after a very long tail, a very long sliver of interests that are out there. Your take in one very specific area would allow you to engage with people who care about that specific area. And look, you really just have to go to YouTube and look at all the different channels and browse all the different categories to understand that there are a multitude of these things that are out there. And in fact, every single category in YouTube is an opportunity to go create a media startup today. Likewise with Facebook targeting, if you were to look at the 500 plus variables that you can use for targeting on Facebook, or even any one of these social media platforms, each of these is an opportunity to build a media startup on top of that, because it already offers you a chance to reach a very specific audience that's out there. And I think the beauty of media startups, and this is why we're such proponents of media entrepreneurs in that space, is that the cost of you trying an idea, taking an idea to market, to prototype something, is very, very small. And very often, if you are a 1 or 2 person team or 3 person team, you could take an idea to market very quickly at very low cost to figure out within 2 months or 3 months whether this is an idea that has legs or not. right? The beauty of digital is that you're able to take ideas forward very quickly, test them quickly. If it fails, fine, try something else. You know, what have you learned from that first failure? So, you know, look for ways to identify a category, an interest group, a community that no one seems to care about, and find a way to build a media business around that.
Good.
Yeah, and I think the other question around, you know, B2B media platforms where the market's already small and niche, I think, you know, it's not so, it's often not about the size of that market. And by your last name, I'm guessing you're from Nepal. So, you know, the beauty of B2B types of media is that it's important for every single country that's out there, whether it's a big country or a small country, or whether it's, overly complex or very simple, in terms of market economics. If you have any specific industry that is thriving or growing or, you know, or evolving in your country, this is a chance for you to report the hell out of that industry and turn it into a B2B service. It's something that you know, journalism schools don't teach, because for some reason this is the unsexy part of journalism. Nobody gets into journalism to go do B2B marketing or B2B journalism. So this is, you know, I think this is a huge opportunity that's often forgotten, right? If you were a business person in the travel industry, you absolutely need to know every single thing about the travel industry in that country. Where do you get that information from? You can't go to Bloomberg because you probably can't afford to pay $2,000 a month for a terminal that you only use one fragment of, you know, where instead you need very specific information, very specific intel around the travel industry as to how many hotels are coming up, how many airlines are flying in, what is the capacity of these flights, you know, and understanding all of that from a comprehensive point of view, I think is a huge opportunity, right? And that's why I love B2B businesses, because I think it's very unsexy, but at the same time, it goes very deep, and it understands a lot about a specific space that no one often thinks about.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for that. We're running out of time a little bit, but we've got two other things I'd like to do before we end. And I do apologize to those whose question I haven't been able to get to. But I would like to ask Bridget one thing. But before I do, about all the grants that are now becoming available and whether she can make some recommendations. We've, as we heard, Google has announced grants, Facebook, et cetera, There's grants being announced, and I think it would be useful to know a little bit more about that, Bridget, if you can. But while you think about that, we'll come back to you in a second. Maybe we could get the question results put up on the screen. I don't know if we're able to do this, but so people can, yeah, there we go. So what we wanted to ask, and I will ask Ross and Alan for your brief comments to this response, and maybe some suggestions, in fact. We see that the first concern of people is actually lack of commercial income. Second one is lack of grants and donations, and then you see the others in order. The lack of COVID protective gear, quite scary and quite high there. The political situation, obviously in some places, is becoming worse, which we're well aware of. Digital security, and then we have the broadband issue. So at the top here is actually lack of commercial income and lack of grants and donations, both of which are about funding, of course, and money. Yeah, Ross, I think what you've been talking about is absolutely germane. Does this surprise you, this finding?
It doesn't surprise me. Most markets, certainly here in East Asia, North America, Western Europe, I'm not that close to markets in Africa and Latin America, but most advertisers are pulling back strongly. And most local businesses are starting to do exactly what I'm recommending to the people on the webinar, is they're starting to pull back their cash spending. And what will happen is, especially for advertising is what we call a cyclical business, which means when demand is up, advertising is up even more. When demand is done. So it's not a surprise to me. I would say that if you have a large commercial revenue line, manage it as closely and as tightly as you can. I was on a different webinar a couple of days ago talking about the future of what the advertising industry looks like after all of this. And kind of like Alan said, the after coronavirus or the enduring coronavirus will create some opportunities. But most of the people who are much more experienced in the industry than I am would tell you that the media industry is going through a crisis that's been accelerated by this. The advertising industry was also going through a big crisis, and it's accelerated by this. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure the world we look at in a year or 2 years will look anything like the world we had a year ago.
Thank you, Ross. Sorry, dropped out a bit at the end, but I think we'll go to Alan now for your final comment, short comment, please, and then back to Bridget.
Yeah, no surprises here. You know, it's the lack of commercial income is, I guess, you know, in this context is probably advertising related, as Ross pointed out, which I think is absolutely true. Just remember that, you know, all of these things were pre-existing problems in the industry on both sides of the fence, on the media editorial side of it, as well as on the advertising side of things. So what we've seen here is an accelerated decline in this space. And hey, this is something that has been a long time coming. It's hard when it hits suddenly, as it is right now. But a year from now, you know, all of these things will look very different.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Bridget, maybe we can end on a note of some hope with some ideas of where people can get some extra funding.
Sure. Well, you know, and I know, you know, kudos to GIJN, which has done a great job of kind of curating these opportunities. Institute for Nonprofit News here in the US has curated a fair degree of these too. You know, there are lots of opportunities popping up. I would say in terms of how you're thinking about approaching them, I mean, a lot of them that I have seen have sort of emphasized the, you know, meeting local information needs, combating misinformation or disinformation, thinking about underserved communities or hard to reach communities, news deserts. So think about, you know, kind of where your coverage is focused. Again, what's that unique value proposition, or what's the unique kind of piece of your mission that is really relevant to those requests for proposals. And at the same time, I think you want to be really critical in evaluating those and making sure that it's really a good fit. You don't want to have to twist yourself around like a pretzel to layer on a whole other scope of work that really isn't aligned with your mission or where you want to be on the other end of this. You know, I think you want to use this as an opportunity. If you're going to apply for one of those things, you either want to make sure that you're pitching work you're already doing. Like if you're already, you know, deploying half of your newsroom just to covering COVID stuff, then ask for some funding to do that so that you can continue with your existing, you know, beats and issues as well. Or, you know, is the grant going to allow you to grow in a direction that you wanted to anyway? You know, is it going to upgrade your technology or your outreach capabilities to interact with your audience in different ways? So, you know, what does it do to kind of address current newsroom needs? What does it do to help you grow in the direction you want to help your organization be where it wants to be when this is all over? I think are sort of the critical components to, you know, evaluating whether it's actually worth like jumping through the hoops of those RFPs, which you know are going to be incredibly competitive, right? The other thing is, you know, I mean, take a look at it, decide which ones you want to go for, fill out the applications and get them in, because the, you know, conventional wisdom is that money is going to go really fast. I think there was another question that I saw just about kind of whether there's, you know, some of the funding opportunities via humanitarian organizations are worth thinking about. And I would say, you know, yes, generally, again, making sure that they are, you know, I think there's a really clear case increasingly that information is a human need and a human right, that information saves lives in moments like this. I think in a lot of ways that sort of humanitarian media lens can kind of be like the, you know, gateway grant opportunity for getting people who don't think of themselves as journalism or media funders to invest in journalism and media when it has really urgent life-saving potential. So if you're doing that kind of work, if you can kind of frame your work in that context, and I think it's worth taking a look at those kinds of humanitarian rapid response grants and seeing, you know, where the, you know, that funder, where that partner is likely to kind of understand your work and your mission and be, you know, an ally over the longer term, and that it just feels like a good fit.
Thank you very much, Bridget, for that. Very helpful. And GIJN, the Global Investigative Journalism Network, will continue to publish on this subject, and we're going to be developing a program in the future to keep supporting organizations and individuals. So, and more webinars, we hope. So thank you very much. I just want to, before we end, I just want to thank all my colleagues at GIJN, in particular Martha and Eunice, who've been of great help in this webinar, as in the ones before and the ones in the future too, I'm sure. And also to the audience for coming in. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of your questions. Please join us again for another webinar. And finally, and by no means least, to our fantastic speakers, to Ross, to Bridget, and to Alan, whose insights were really exceptional and helpful. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope to have you all back again. And thanks all, everyone, and I'll say goodbye for now.
Thank you. Everybody stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.